Here's the thing about being human in a galaxy full of herbivores. You get used to people running away from you. Not sprinting, mind you. That would be too honest. No, it's more of a strategic retreat, a sudden remembering of urgent business elsewhere, a convenient need to check something in the opposite direction. Before we begin, YouTube shows me that 93% of you haven't subscribed yet. Subscribing is free, it really supports our community, and I'd love for you to be part of it. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Cameron had been working at the Galactic Naval Academy on Epsilon Prime for 8 months now, and he still couldn't smile at anyone without causing a minor evacuation. Not that he blamed them, really. When you've spent millions of years of evolution perfecting the art of not being eaten, and then some bipedal ape with forward-facing eyes and visible canines wanders into your space station, well, instinct doesn't care about interstellar peace treaties. Epsilon Prime was gorgeous. He'd give it that. The orbital station hung in the darkness like a crystalline flower, its rotating sections catching the light of the nearby star and throwing it back in prismatic waves. Inside, the architecture was all soaring ceilings and bioluminescent panels, designed to make the primarily prey-descended species feel safe and open. No dark corners, no hiding spots. Everything visible, everything safe. Except for the humans, of course. They were the monsters in the closet, even when they were just trying to fix the air filtration system. Cameron knelt in front of an access panel in Corridor 9B, his tool bag open beside him, running a diagnostic on the environmental controls. The air had been running cold in this section for 3 days, and Commander Romal had finally put in a work order. The commander was Chimrex, an insectoid species with compound eyes that reflected light in unsettling ways, and mandibles that clicked when he spoke. Funny how nobody ran from him, but Cameron couldn't eat lunch in the cafeteria without clearing 3 tables. Regulation adherence is paramount, Romal had said that morning, his translator rendering his clicks and chittering into flat, emotionless standard galactic. The Brennall delegation arrives in 6 hours. All systems must be optimal. The Brennall. Now that was interesting. Cameron had heard rumors about them for weeks. They were one of the only predator species in the Galactic Council, and even then, they were barely tolerated. Lion-like, proud, and apparently sophisticated enough to have convinced the galaxy that they were civilized. The Academy was hosting them for some kind of cultural exchange, which was either incredibly progressive or incredibly stupid, depending on who you asked. Cameron was betting on stupid, but then again, he was just the maintenance guy. What did he know? "Excuse me." The voice came from behind him, high-pitched and trembling. Cameron didn't turn around immediately. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Instead, he called out, "Yeah, just fixing the temperature controls. Should be done in a few minutes. I need to access the storage locker. Behind you." Now Cameron did turn, slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and his face carefully neutral. A Lepni cadet stood there, about 3 meters away, which was actually closer than most of them got. The species looked like someone had taken a rabbit, made it bipedal, and given it anxiety. This particular specimen had gray and white fur, large amber eyes that were currently the size of dinner plates, and ears that kept swiveling toward Cameron like organic radar dishes. "Sure thing," Cameron said softly, already shifting to the side. "It's all yours." The cadet, whose name patch read Pip, edged past him like he was navigating a minefield. His nose twitched constantly, and Cameron could see his pulse hammering in his throat. When Pip reached the locker, his hands shook so badly he dropped his access card twice. Cameron wanted to help, wanted to say something reassuring, Something to prove he wasn't going to suddenly grow fangs and pounce. But he'd tried that before. Talking just made it worse. So he turned back to his panel and pretended to be absorbed in his work while Pip grabbed whatever he needed and fled. The soft patter of feet retreated down the corridor, and Cameron sighed. 8 months. 8 months of being treated like a walking nightmare. He'd worked with wild animals back on Earth, spent 2 years volunteering at a big cat sanctuary in Montana, and the tigers there had been more comfortable around him than his co-workers here. You cannot take it personally. The voice was familiar, warm with a hint of exasperation. Cameron glanced up to see Dr. Nell approaching, her dark hair pulled back in its usual practical bun, her gray eyes amused. She was one of the few humans at the academy, a xenobiologist who'd been studying interspecies relations for the better part of a decade. She was also the closest thing Cameron had to a friend on this station. I don't, Cameron lied, closing the access panel. I'm just wondering why I left Earth for this. The generous pay? The opportunity to see the stars? The chance to terrify innocent rabbit people? Nell crouched beside him, examining his work. You know, they're going to get used to you eventually. Sure. Another decade or two, and they might not hide when I walk into a room. Nell laughed, the sound echoing off the polished walls. Have you heard about the Brennall visit? Hard to miss. Romal's been on everyone about protocols and proper behavior. I'm assuming that includes me not breathing too loud or existing too visibly. Actually, Nell said, and there was a gleam in her eye that Cameron had learned to be wary of. I was hoping you'd be visible. Very visible. Cameron stood, wiping his hands on his work pants. Why do I get the feeling I'm about to regret this conversation? Because you're perceptive. Look, I'm running a research project on interspecies psychology, specifically how different species perceive and interact with predator-descended beings. The Brennall visit is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. They're bringing cubs, Cameron, actual younglings. That hasn't happened in over 2 centuries. And you want me to… what? Stare at them? I promise you, that'll go over well. I want you to observe, to be present, to give me your perspective as someone who actually understands predator behavior. Nell's expression turned serious. Everyone else here is approaching this from a prey mindset. Even Romal, even the other scientists. They're cataloging threats and defensive postures. But you actually know what you're looking at. Cameron considered this. It was true that his background was unusual, not just for the Academy, but for humans in general. Most people's experience with predators was limited to house cats and the occasional zoo visit. Cameron had spent years working hands-on with apex predators, learning their body language, understanding the difference between aggression and play, dominance and curiosity. I'll think about it, he said finally. Think fast. They arrive in 5 hours, and the observation deck is going to be packed. She left him there in the corridor, his tools scattered around him, and Cameron found himself genuinely curious, for the first time in months. Predators. Real ones, not just humans with their blunted instincts and grocery store meat. Maybe this wouldn't be so boring after all. 3 hours later, Cameron stood in the observation deck's maintenance alcove, supposedly checking the atmospheric processors, but actually watching the growing crowd. The deck was one of the largest open spaces on the station, with floor-to-ceiling transparent aluminum panels offering a view of the stars that made you feel like you were floating in the void. Under normal circumstances, it was peaceful. Today, it was chaos. Cadets from a dozen different species clustered in nervous groups, their instructors trying and failing to maintain order. Pip was there with two other cadets. Wex, a Corelli whose feathers kept ruffling in agitation, and Soren, a Milvus with the graceful build of a deer and the worried expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. "I heard they have claws as long as your arm," Wex was saying, his translator giving his chirps a nervous edge. "I heard they eat live prey," Soren added, her hooves clicking on the deck plating as she shifted her weight. "They're civilized," Pip said, but he didn't sound convinced. "The council vouched for them. They wouldn't let them come here if they were dangerous." Cameron almost laughed. The council had vouched for humans, too, and look how well that was going. He returned his attention to the supposedly faulty processor, which was working fine, and waited. The arrival was announced with all the pomp the Academy could muster. Commander Romal stood at attention near the airlock, flanked by senior staff. Dr. Nell was there too, her recording equipment discreetly positioned, her expression professionally neutral. The airlock cycled. The doors opened. And the Brennall entered. Cameron felt his breath catch. They were magnificent. Easily 2.5 meters tall, bipedal but with a grace that suggested they could drop to all fours in an instant. Their fur was a deep tawny gold, marked with darker stripes across their shoulders and back. Manes, thick and luxurious, framed faces that were simultaneously alien and achingly familiar. They had the same forward-facing eyes as humans, the same focused gaze, but their features were distinctly feline, with short muzzles and mobile ears that swiveled constantly, tracking every sound. The two adults wore formal attire, flowing robes that managed to look dignified despite being designed for a non-humanoid frame. The male, whose translator identified him as Envoy Sharek, moved with casual confidence. The female, Envoy Maris, was slightly smaller, but radiated the same self-assured power. And between them, barely reaching their waists, was a cub. Grix, the translator supplied. He was all oversized paws and curious eyes, his mane just beginning to grow in tufts around his face. He looked around the observation deck with undisguised fascination, his tail swishing behind him. The cadets, predictably, had backed up about 5 meters. Even the instructors looked tense. "Welcome to the Galactic Naval Academy," Commander Romal said, his mandibles clicking out the formal greeting. "We are honored by your presence." Sharek inclined his head gracefully. "The honor is ours, Commander. We hope this visit will foster greater understanding between our peoples." His voice, even through the translator, had a rumbling quality, like distant thunder. Several cadets flinched. Cameron watched, fascinated, as the delegation began their tour. Romal led them around the observation deck, pointing out various features while maintaining a careful distance. The Brennall were perfectly polite, asking appropriate questions, making all the right diplomatic noises. But Cameron could see the tension in their shoulders, the way their ears flicked back when someone gasped or stepped away too quickly. They knew they were being judged. They knew one wrong move would confirm every prejudice. Little Grix, however, seemed oblivious to the politics. He kept trying to wander off, investigating interesting objects and peering at the various species with unfiltered curiosity. Maris kept a gentle hand on his shoulder, steering him back to the group. Then disaster struck. Well, not disaster, but something that felt like disaster to everyone except Cameron. Grix spotted Cameron's tool bag. Or, more specifically, he spotted the hydrospanner that had rolled about 1/2 meter away from it, its metallic surface catching the light in interesting ways. The cub's ears perked up, his eyes locked onto the tool. And then, with the universal single-mindedness of small children everywhere, he broke free from his mother's grip and pounced. The observation deck went silent. Every eye turned to watch as Grix attacked the hydrospanner with all the ferocity of a kitten with a string toy. He batted it with one paw. It rolled. He chased it. When it stopped, he crouched low, his hindquarters wiggling, and pounced again. Cameron, still in his maintenance alcove, found himself grinning. It was play behavior, pure and simple. The cub wasn't hunting, wasn't being aggressive. He was just being a kid. The hydrospanner rolled directly to Cameron's feet. Grix followed it and looked up, suddenly aware he'd wandered into someone else's space. For a moment, they stared at each other, human and Brennall, predator and predator. Then Grix did something that made Cameron's heart melt. The cub let out a tiny growl, barely audible, the kind of mock fierce sound that young animals make when they're playing at being grown up. His ears were forward, his tail high, his whole posture screaming, "I'm so scary! Look at me!" Cameron didn't think. He just responded the way he'd responded to 100 cubs back at the sanctuary, the way that felt natural and right. He dropped into a crouch, looked directly at Grix, and growled back. It was a rumbling, playful sound, accompanied by a wide grin. Then he laughed, warm and delighted, and held out the hydrospanner like an offering. The observation deck erupted in panic. Pip made a sound like a squeaky toy being stepped on. Wex's feathers exploded outward, and then the cadet simply fainted, dropping like a stone. Soren backed up so fast she crashed into a bench. Even some of the instructors looked ready to bolt. But Cameron wasn't paying attention to them. He was watching Grix's face light up with joy, watching the cub recognize a playmate when he saw one. Grix pounced forward, not at Cameron, but at the tool, and Cameron let him have it, pulling his hand back at the last second. The cub grabbed the hydrospanner in his paws and rolled onto his back, wrestling with it triumphantly. Cameron sat down cross-legged on the deck, completely relaxed, and watched Grix play. After a moment, the cub brought the tool back and dropped it at Cameron's knee, his meaning clear, "Again!" So Cameron rolled it away gently, and Grix chased it, and the game continued, while approximately 50 sentient beings watched in frozen horror. "What?" Commander Romal said slowly, "is happening?" It was Miris who answered, and her voice was filled with something that might have been wonder. "He is playing. They are playing together." Sharek moved closer, his movements careful but not aggressive. Cameron glanced up at him, keeping his posture open and non-threatening, and the Brennall envoy studied him with those intense golden eyes. "You are not afraid," Sharek said. It wasn't a question. "No," Cameron said simply. "Should I be?" "Most would be. Most are." Sharek gestured at the terrified cadets with one clawed hand. "You responded to my son's play invitation. That is, unexpected. From a human. I worked with big cats on Earth," Cameron explained, keeping his voice low and calm while Grix continued his assault on the hydrospanner. "Tigers, lions, leopards. This isn't my first time reading predator body language." Mireis joined her mate, and Cameron could see the surprise in her expression. "Earth has predators?" "Earth is full of predators. We're a death world, remember? Everything there is either trying to eat something else or trying not to be eaten. Humans just happen to be the ones who got good at both." Dr. Nell approached, her recording equipment capturing everything, her face alight with scientific glee. "This is remarkable. Cameron, would you be willing to continue this interaction for research purposes?" "I'm literally just playing with a kid," Cameron said, but he was smiling. Grix had abandoned the hydrospanner and was now batting at Cameron's bootlaces, his tiny claws retracted, his movements pure play. "You are doing more than that," Sharek said quietly. "You are treating my son as what he is, a child, not a threat, not a monster, a child who wants to play." The observation deck was still silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. The terror was fading, replaced by confusion and cautious curiosity. Even Soren had stopped backing away, though she still looked ready to bolt at any second. Wex was being revived by another cadet, his feathers still askew. Cameron picked up Grix gently, holding the cub at arm's length, and the little Brennall mewed happily, pawing at the air. "He's adorable," Cameron said honestly. "How old is he?" "By your years, approximately 5, Maris said. She was purring, a deep thrumming sound. "He has never met anyone outside our species who was not afraid of him." "Well," Cameron said, setting Grix down and watching the cub immediately pounce on his tool bag, "that seems like a problem we should fix." And just like that, standing in the observation deck of the Galactic Naval Academy, with a Brennall cub destroying his equipment and a crowd of terrified aliens watching his every move, Cameron realized that maybe, just maybe, this assignment was about to get interesting. The next 20 minutes were possibly the strangest of Cameron's life, and he'd once had to explain to a Centaurian diplomat why humans kept carnivorous animals as pets. Grix had decided, with the absolute certainty that only small children possess, that Cameron was his new best friend. The cub refused to leave his side, climbing onto his lap, batting at his hands, and making little chirping sounds that were probably the Brennall equivalent of delighted laughter. Cameron, for his part, played along, doing the same things he'd done with cubs back home. Gentle wrestling, pretend biting, exaggerated reactions to Grix's attacks. The cadets watched like they were witnessing some kind of supernatural event. Pip had inched closer, his nose twitching overtime, clearly torn between curiosity and self-preservation. Soren remained at a safe distance, but at least she'd stopped looking, like she might faint. Wex had recovered consciousness but refused to stand up, choosing instead to observe from the safety of the floor. "This is unprecedented," Commander Romal said, his mandibles clicking rapidly in what Cameron had learned was agitation. "The protocols did not account for this scenario." "Maybe that's the problem with your protocols," Cameron said mildly, scratching behind Grix's ears the way the cub was clearly begging for. "You're so worried about what could go wrong that you forget to notice when things go right." Dr. Nell was practically vibrating with excitement, her equipment recording every angle. "The behavioral markers are fascinating. Cameron, you're using the same dominance submission signals that adult Brennall would use, but in a play context. How did you know to do that?" "I didn't know," Cameron admitted. "It's just instinct. When a cub play bites, you let them, but you don't react like it hurts unless they're actually being too rough. When they pounce, you act surprised, but not scared. It's about teaching boundaries while still making it fun." Sharek knelt down to Cameron's level, an impressive sight given his size. Up close, the Brennall was even more imposing, all muscle and contained power. But his eyes were warm as he watched his son play. "You speak of teaching. This is what we do with our young. Play is how they learn to be part of the pride, how they understand their place in the world." "Same with human children," Cameron said. "We just forgot somewhere along the way that playing doesn't have to mean someone gets hurt." Maris sat down as well, creating a small circle of predators on the observation deck floor, while the rest of the station looked on in bewilderment. "You said Earth has many predator species. Do humans interact with them?" Some humans do. I did. There are sanctuaries, rehabilitation centers, conservation programs. We study them, protect them, sometimes raise them when their parents can't. Cameron let Grix capture his hand, the cub's tiny teeth grazing his skin without breaking it. The thing about predators is that people think they're all rage and hunting instinct. But that's not true. Predators are smart. They're social. They play, they bond, they have families and rules and complicated relationships. They're not monsters. They're just survival specialists who happen to eat meat. The words hung in the air, and Cameron realized everyone was listening. Even the cadets had stopped whispering among themselves. Sharek's expression shifted into something Cameron couldn't quite read. That is what we have tried to tell the galaxy for generations, that we are more than our teeth and claws. But they do not listen. They don't listen because they're scared, Cameron said. And I get it. I really do. Fear is a powerful thing. But you know what's more powerful? Understanding. Actually taking the time to learn instead of just assuming. Grix chose that moment to sneeze directly in Cameron's face, then looked mortified in the way only small children can. Cameron burst out laughing, wiping his face with his sleeve, and the cub relaxed, chittering happily. "See?" Cameron said, grinning at the crowd. "Terrifying apex predator behavior right there. Everyone panic." To his surprise, Pip made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was nervous and cut off quickly, but it was there. Progress, Cameron thought. Tiny, microscopic progress, but progress nonetheless. Dr. Nell cleared her throat. "Cameron, how would you feel about a more formal demonstration? Something structured, controlled, where we could really show what predator-to-predator communication looks like?" Cameron looked at Grix, who was now trying to eat his watchband. He looked at Sharek and Maris, whose expressions were carefully neutral, but whose body language screamed hope. He looked at the crowd of terrified, fascinated cadets who were seeing their worldview crack open just a little bit. "Yeah," he said finally. "Yeah, I think I'd feel pretty good about that." The Academy's main gymnasium had been transformed into something between a scientific laboratory and a gladiatorial arena, which pretty much summed up everyone's expectations for what was about to happen. Cameron stood in the prep room, staring at his reflection in the polished metal wall and wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. Through the transparent partition, he could see the gymnasium filling up with observers. Not just Academy personnel anymore, either. Word had spread through the station like wildfire, and now there were remote feeds set up, connecting to other stations, other planets. Apparently, watching a human interact with adult Brennall was must-see entertainment across the galaxy. No pressure or anything. "You do not have to do this," Maris said quietly. She'd insisted on speaking with him privately before the demonstration, and now she stood with her arms crossed, looking every inch the concerned parent. "If you are uncertain, if you feel unsafe, we will cancel. No one will think less of you." "I'm not worried about me," Cameron said honestly. "I'm worried about you. If this goes wrong, if people think I was threatened or attacked, it'll set your species back decades." Her ears flicked back, a sign of distress he was learning to recognize. "We have lived with that fear for a very long time. Every interaction, every diplomatic mission, every moment is a test we must pass perfectly or be condemned. It is exhausting." Cameron turned to face her fully. "Is that why you brought Grix? To show you're not monsters?" "Yes." The admission seemed to cost her something. "We thought if the galaxy could see our children, see that we raise them with love and care, that we teach them gentleness alongside strength. Perhaps they would understand we are not the savage beasts they imagine. But even that has been difficult. Most species are too frightened to come near him. I noticed he's not out there right now. Sharek is watching him in our quarters. We thought it best, for this demonstration, to remove variables. If something goes wrong... She trailed off, but Cameron understood. If something went wrong, they didn't want their child to see it. Nothing's going to go wrong, Cameron said, with more confidence than he felt. Your husband and I are going to walk around, maybe do some play fighting, show everyone that predators can communicate without violence. It'll be boring, actually. Disappointing. People are expecting blood and drama, and they're going to get a nature documentary. Maris made a sound that was almost a laugh. You are either very brave or very foolish. Can't it be both? This time she did laugh, that deep purring sound that vibrated through her chest. You remind me of Sharek when he was younger, before the weight of representation made him cautious. He used to joke even in serious moments. What changed? Her expression darkened. We had an incident 10 years ago. A trade delegation on a neutral station. There was a misunderstanding. A Brennall merchant reached for something. A guard thought he was attacking. By the time it was sorted out, 3 people were injured, and our entire trade agreement was dissolved. It did not matter that we were not at fault. It only mattered that we were predators, and predators are dangerous. Cameron felt something cold settle in his stomach. That's not fair. No, Maris agreed, it is not. But it is reality. We are judged not by our actions, but by what others fear we might do. You understand this, yes? You said humans face similar prejudice. Yeah, but at least we're numerous enough that we can't be completely shut out. There are billions of humans. How many Brennall are there? In the galaxy? Perhaps 80 million. On worlds within council space? Fewer than 2 million. We are a small population, Cameron. We can be ignored, sidelined, excluded, and it barely registers as a problem to most species. They simply do not think of us. The bitterness in her voice was raw, and Cameron found himself angry on her behalf. It was one thing to be feared when you were powerful, numerous, a threat that couldn't be dismissed. It was another thing entirely to be feared when you were vulnerable, when that fear translated directly into isolation and marginalization. Then, let's give them something else to think about, Cameron said firmly. Let's show them what they've been missing. Maris studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Dr. Nell explained your background. You have worked with many predators on Earth. May I ask, were they ever afraid of you? Cameron thought about it. Sometimes, especially the rescued ones, the ones who'd been hurt by humans before. But most of them, once they got to know me, once they understood I wasn't a threat, they were curious, playful even. I had a tiger named Sasha, who used to greet me by chuffing and rubbing her head against the fence. She was 300 kilograms of apex predator, and she wanted scratches behind her ears. We are not so different then. Brennall also enjoy scratches behind the ears. Maris's tone was light, but her eyes were serious. You see us, Cameron. Not as monsters or weapons or political complications, but as people. That is rarer than you know. Before Cameron could respond, Dr. Nell's voice came through the intercom. We're ready when you are. Cameron, Sharek is entering the gymnasium now. Cameron took a deep breath and stepped toward the door. Maris placed a hand on his shoulder, her claws retracted, her touch gentle. Thank you, she said quietly. Whatever happens, thank you for trying. The gymnasium was silent when Cameron walked in. Banks of recording equipment lined the walls, their lenses tracking his every movement. The observation gallery was packed, faces pressed against the transparent barriers. He spotted Pip in the front row, flanked by Soren and a now conscious Wex. Even Commander Romal was there, his compound eyes reflecting the harsh lights. Sharek stood in the center of the space, and Cameron was struck again by how magnificent the Brennall was. He'd removed his formal robes, revealing a physique that was all controlled power, muscle moving under fur like water. His mane was impressive, dark and thick, framing his face in a way that was both beautiful and intimidating. They'd agreed on the parameters beforehand: natural behavior, authentic interaction, no holding back. The whole point was to show what real predator-to-predator communication looked like, not some sanitized, safe version. Which meant Sharek was going to test Cameron, push him, see how he responded to actual dominance displays. Cameron walked forward, keeping his steps even and confident. He'd done this before, entering spaces with dangerous animals, and the key was never to show fear or aggression, just calm certainty. Sharek began to circle him, a slow, deliberate movement that made the crowd gasp. His tail lashed once, twice, and his eyes never left Cameron's face. It was a classic dominance behavior, establishing that this was his territory, his terms. Cameron turned with him, maintaining eye contact but not staring, keeping his shoulders relaxed. When Sharek moved closer, crowding into his personal space, Cameron held his ground but didn't push back. He was acknowledging the Brennall's dominance without showing submission, a delicate balance that required reading every tiny signal. Then Sharek growled. It was nothing like Grix's playful rumble. This was deep, resonant, a sound that Cameron felt in his bones, the kind of sound that said, very clearly, "I could end you." The crowd made collective sounds of alarm. Cameron heard someone shout for security, but Cameron had heard that growl before, or versions of it. He knew it wasn't a promise of violence, it was a question. It was Sharek asking, "Who are you? And do you understand the language we speak?" "So," Cameron growled back. Not as deep, not as powerful, but clear and steady. And in that growl, he packed everything he'd learned from years of working with predators: respect, acknowledgement, the understanding that this wasn't about fighting, but about communication. Sharek's ears flicked forward. His tail stopped lashing. And then, incredibly, he chuffed, the same greeting sound Cameron had described to Maris, the sound that meant recognition and acceptance. "You understand," Sharek said, his voice filled with wonder. "You actually understand." "Told you," Cameron said, grinning. "Predators aren't that different. We all speak the same basic language." What followed was part demonstration, part dance. Sharek would display, Cameron would respond. They moved around each other, testing boundaries, establishing mutual respect. When Sharek mock-charged, Cameron stood firm but shifted his weight, ready to move if needed. When Cameron reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, Sharek allowed the touch, permitted Cameron to briefly make contact with his mane. It was exactly what Dr. Nell had hoped for: a clear, observable example of predator interaction that wasn't violent. They were communicating, negotiating, understanding each other through body language and sound, through movements that looked aggressive to prey species but were actually sophisticated and nuanced. "This is remarkable," Dr. Nell narrated for the recording, her voice clinical but excited. "What we're seeing is a complex exchange of dominance and submission signals, threat displays that are immediately de-escalated, territorial behavior that's being negotiated rather than fought over. Both subjects are using their predator instincts not to attack, but to communicate. Cameron was so focused on Sharek that he almost missed the sound from the observation gallery. It was Pip, the nervous Lepne cadet, speaking to Soren in a voice that carried in the quiet gymnasium. "They are not fighting," Pip said, wonder in his voice. "I thought, when predators met, they fought. But they are not fighting. They are talking." "Talking with growls," Soren replied, but she sounded less frightened now. "I did not know that was possible." "Neither did I," Wex added, his feathers finally settling back into their normal pattern. "Perhaps we have misunderstood much." Cameron caught Sharek's eye and saw the same hope there that he'd seen in Maris. This was working. Slowly, cautiously, it was actually working. They continued for another 10 minutes, and the demonstration was winding down to controlled sparring. Movements that looked dynamic, but were actually carefully choreographed, when everything went wrong. A shrill alarm cut through the gymnasium. Emergency lighting activated, bathing everything in harsh red. And somewhere in the confusion, somewhere in the sudden chaos of people moving and shouting, Cameron heard a sound that made his blood run cold. The high-pitched, terrified cry of a cub in distress. Cameron didn't think. Thinking was for people who had time, and right now, time was a luxury nobody had. The alarm was still wailing, people were shouting instructions that contradicted each other, and somewhere in the chaos, Grix was crying. Cameron bolted toward the sound, vaguely aware that Sharek was moving beside him, both of them operating on the same instinct: protect the young. They burst through the gymnasium doors into the corridor beyond, and Cameron's maintenance training kicked in immediately. The alarm pattern was specific. Hull breach protocol, Section 8, observation deck. The same deck where they'd met just hours ago. The same deck with the massive transparent aluminum panels and the beautiful view of space. The same deck that had an open maintenance shaft because Cameron hadn't finished his repairs. "No," Cameron breathed. And then he was running faster, his boots pounding on the deck plating, Sharek matching his pace stride for stride. They reached the observation deck in seconds that felt like hours. The scene was pandemonium. Maris was there, her claws fully extended, her mane bristled, looking more terrifying than Cameron had thought possible. Commander Romal was gesturing wildly at a control panel, and near the edge of the open maintenance shaft, barely visible in the emergency lighting, was a small golden form clinging to the edge. Grix had wandered during the demonstration, had gotten curious about the interesting machinery, had gone exploring, had gotten too close to a drop that went down 3 decks to the station's lower maintenance levels. The emergency barriers should have activated automatically, but of course, because the universe had a sense of humor, they'd malfunctioned. Probably the same system glitch Cameron had been trying to fix all day. The cub was holding on with his small paws, his claws scrambling for purchase on the smooth metal, and his face was pure terror. He was making sounds that broke Cameron's heart, calling for his parents in a language that needed no translation. "Grix!" Maris lunged forward, but Sharek caught her, held her back. "You are too large," he said, his voice strained but controlled. "You will not fit through the opening. You will knock him down trying to reach him." "Then what do we do?" Maris's voice cracked. "What do we do?" Cameron was already moving. He dropped to his stomach at the edge of the shaft, extending his arm down. His shoulders were narrower than the Brennall's, his frame smaller, his reach possibly just enough. "Grix," he called, keeping his voice as calm as he could manage. "Hey, buddy, look at me. Look up here." The cub's eyes found his, wide and terrified, and so very young. I need you to reach up with one paw, okay? Just one. I'm going to grab you. Can you do that for me? Grix made a small sound, somewhere between a whimper and a chirp. His paws were slipping, his strength fading fast. Now, Grix. I need you to reach now. The cub extended one small paw upward, stretching as far as he could. It wasn't enough. Cameron was still 10 centimeters short, maybe 15. I am going to lower you, Sharek said, and before Cameron could protest, he felt powerful hands grip his ankles. Do not let go of him. No matter what, do not let go. Then Cameron was sliding forward, the edge of the shaft passing under his chest, his arms extending into empty space. The drop yawned below him, darkness and danger, and a fall that would hurt even if it didn't kill. But Sharek was holding him, his grip unshakable, lowering him inch by inch. Cameron's fingers brushed fur. He stretched further, felt his shoulder joints protest, and then his hand closed around Grix's wrist. Got him, Cameron called. Pull us up. Sharek pulled, smooth and strong, and Cameron held on with everything he had. Grix was light but terrified, thrashing slightly, making it harder. Cameron wrapped his other arm around the cub, pinning him against his chest, protecting him from the walls of the shaft as they rose. Then they were up, Cameron rolling onto the deck with Grix clutched against him, both of them breathing hard. Maris was there instantly, gathering her son into her arms, checking him over with frantic efficiency. Grix buried his face in her fur and wailed, all the terror finally spilling out now that he was safe. Cameron lay on the deck, staring at the ceiling, his heart hammering. His arms felt like jelly. He was probably going to have bruises on his ankles from Sharek's grip, and he'd never felt better in his life. Sharek knelt beside him, placing one massive hand on Cameron's shoulder. You saved my son. We saved your son, Cameron corrected, sitting up slowly. I couldn't have reached him without you. No, Sharek said, and his voice was thick with emotion. You could not have. We did this together. Predator and predator, working as one. The observation deck had filled with people again. The cadets who'd been watching the demonstration had followed the commotion, and now they stood in a loose semicircle staring at the scene before them. Two predators, exhausted and disheveled, having just cooperated to save a child's life. No violence, no aggression, just two people doing what needed to be done. Pip stepped forward slowly, his whole body trembling. May I? He started, his voice barely audible. May I see if the small one is unharmed? Maris looked up, tears matting the fur around her eyes. For a moment, Cameron thought she might refuse, might gather her family and retreat to safety. Instead, she nodded. Pip approached, each step clearly costing him tremendous courage. He reached Grix and, with shaking hands, gently checked the cub's limbs the way any medic would. He is frightened, but undamaged, Pip said finally. No injuries. He will be well. Thank you, Maris said softly. Thank you for caring. Soren was next, then Wex, each of them approaching slowly but genuinely, asking if they could help, offering comfort in their own ways. It wasn't much. It wasn't a complete transformation, but it was something. It was a beginning. Commander Romal clicked his mandibles, a sound Cameron had learned meant deep thought. I was wrong, he said, addressing the room. I believed predators were inherently dangerous, that proximity meant risk. But today, I witnessed cooperation, sacrifice, and gentleness. Perhaps the danger lies not in what species we are, but in our refusal to understand each other. Dr. Nell was recording everything, of course, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. This is going out live to 60 stations, she said quietly to Cameron. Everyone saw what just happened. Everything. Cameron looked around at the gathered crowd, at the Brennall family huddled together, at the cadets who were no longer running away. He thought about Maritz's words, about being judged for what you might do instead of what you actually do. He thought about fear and understanding, about bridges built in moments of crisis. Good, he said finally. Let them see. Let them all see what happens when predators choose to protect instead of hunt. Grix had calmed down, still sniffling but no longer wailing. He peeked out from his mother's embrace and reached a small paw toward Cameron. Cameron took it gently, and the cub squeezed his fingers. "Uncle Cameron," Grix said, the translator rendering his chittering into something that made Cameron's chest tight. "You saved me." "Your dad saved you too," Cameron said. "We both did. That's what family does." Sharek's expression shifted into something Cameron couldn't quite name. "Family," he repeated slowly. "Yes, perhaps that is what we are becoming." 3 weeks later, Cameron stood in the same gymnasium where the demonstration had taken place. But the atmosphere was completely different. Instead of tense observation, there was laughter. Instead of fear, there was curiosity. Pip was on the floor, tentatively rolling a ball toward Grix, who pounced on it with delight. Soren watched from a careful distance, but no longer looked ready to bolt. Wex was actually taking notes, his scientific curiosity finally overcoming his survival instincts. The footage of the rescue had spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Suddenly, everyone wanted to talk about predator species, wanted to understand them, wanted to explore cooperation instead of segregation. It wasn't universal acceptance, not by a long shot. There were still plenty of species who watched the videos and saw only danger. But enough people had seen something else, something worth pursuing. Cameron's communication device chimed. A message from a species he'd never heard of, the Ornlee, requesting a meeting. They were predators too, apparently. Isolated on their homeworld for generations, afraid to join the galactic community because of what they were. They'd seen the videos. They wanted to talk. Dr. Nell appeared beside him, reading over his shoulder. "You know you're becoming a celebrity, right? The human who speaks predator. They're calling you the bridge builder on some stations." "That's ridiculous," Cameron said, but he was smiling. "I just played with a kid." "You did more than that, and you know it." Nell nodded toward the floor, where Grix had successfully convinced Pip to chase him in a gentle game of tag. "You showed the galaxy that what we fear isn't always what we think it is. That sometimes the scariest thing isn't the predator in front of you, it's the assumptions in your own head." Cameron watched the cub and the cadet play, watched Maris and Sharek talking quietly with Commander Romal, watched understanding slowly, carefully, take root. "Maybe being a predator isn't about what you could do," he said softly. "Maybe it's about what you choose not to do, and who you choose to protect." Grix's laughter echoed through the gymnasium, and for the first time since arriving at the academy, Cameron felt like he was exactly where he belonged. Not despite being human, not despite being a predator, but because of it.